Okay, yeah, we'll put Cardi B at number 16. That makes sense. And then we'll put Nas at 24. Yeah, yeah. And then Lupe. No, we're not even gonna include Lupe. That's insane. Most Def? No, he's already on there. We got the Black Star album. Why would he need to be on there more times? So today, June 7th, 2022, Rolling Stone put out the 200 greatest hip hop albums of all time. These are the albums that have defined hip hop history, from Run DMC to Playboi Carti, from G Funk to Drill, from the Bronx to Houston and beyond. And just like with every other list, people have some thoughts, and now so do I. And normally, when it comes to these sorts of lists, I tend to ignore them or just realize that it's at the end of the day someone's opinion. But this is different because I saw a tweet about an album by Cardi B, Invasion of Privacy, being placed at number 16, which puts it above Illmatic, which is at number 24, I believe, as well as Mad Villainy and Aquemini and All Eyes on Me. So now I have some thoughts. Alongside this list of albums, they did also kind of have a little blurb about how they decided and what the criteria was to an extent, so I'll put that up here. But the gist of it is that if they were to decide between an album from a classic act, such as Outkast or A Tribe Called Quest, versus an artist who would make the list more interesting, such as the Jacka, Saba, or Camp Lo, they generally went with the latter option to make the list more interesting. And I mean, I get it because they wanted to have a bit of everything in this list, but that doesn't necessarily explain the ranking. So that's something I'll get into in a minute. The other thing that they mentioned at the end is that as they listened to these albums, they were less interested and just overall not as swayed by the older albums that people may have nostalgia for, which I appreciate them at least mentioning because, there's a lot of, like, nostalgia is strong. There's a lot of albums and artists that are, may not be that good, but because we have like a connection to it in some way, we're going to keep going back to. So they're essentially covering all their bases here. They want to make sure that they have an answer. But what they don't have an answer for is how exactly they chose the numbering here. Now, that honestly, it feels really arbitrary, especially because if you look at the authors credited here, or the writers, there's about 15 or 16 of them. I don't know how exactly they decided to split up the albums, or if everyone listened to every album, because that would be insane. Like that's a lot of music to listen to for a ranking. Like you have to listen to it multiple times for, in my opinion, to give a proper ranking. So, it does probably time consuming, but if it was the case where it was just certain people dealt with certain albums, how did they, I guess, argue for that album or its ranking or for its inclusion on this list? Like, there's not a whole lot of detail there. If we had gotten that, I feel like it would make more sense and I'd be way more forgiving in terms of placements. But right now, it honestly just sounds like they threw all these albums that made the cut into a random number generator and assigned a number to them from 1 to 200, because that's how it feels, with the exception of maybe the top 10. But even the top 10, I know a lot of people are going to argue, is just kind of like all over the place. Like once I saw some of the placements of other albums and the lack of inclusion or exclusion, I guess, of certain artists and albums, I realized that maybe this list isn't for me. Maybe it's more for newer listeners, maybe for people who are just getting into hip hop. Because honestly, like you really can't go wrong with most of these albums. They're all pretty solid. So it's interesting. Like I'm trying to understand exactly where they're coming from. Now, let's take a look at the. Oh yeah. Also, I'm not going to go into all 200 of them. That's crazy. But let's look at the top 10 just to start. I'll mention a few other ones that are in here as well. But at number 1, we have Notorious Big with Ready to Die, which I'm sure a lot of people can argue for number one greatest album or hip hop album of all time. For me, sure, I get it. I'm not going to argue that it shouldn't be there. I would say it's in the top 10 at least. So that checks out for me. Then we have at number 2, Outkast Stankonia, which interesting, especially considering they have Aquemini on this list, and even more interesting because they didn't include ATLiens, which I think a lot of people prefer over Stankonia. So that's a choice, to say the least. I guess maybe just because the other thing that they didn't really mention is was the placement of these or the inclusion of these based on just fully on impact or sales? Because I think they did say it might have been impact or how cultural relevance, I guess. But I don't know. I would still argue ATLiens is more impactful than that. Then we have at number 3, Blueprint from Jay-Z, which sure, it should be somewhere up there, I guess. And then as we're going through, we have Public Enemy, which is surprising, I would say. Again, I can't say exactly where I would place that, but maybe not that high up. And then number 5 is To Pimp a Butterfly, which I know a lot of people are going to have thoughts on because recently there's been a lot of slander about To Pimp a Butterfly. People have just been saying it's mid, which is crazy to me. I mean, I think it's a great album. Is it meant to be top 5? Maybe. It's hard to say. I wouldn't necessarily put it that high, but I would still give it a lot of recognition because it was a very impactful album, which kind of goes back to what exactly was the criteria? Is this actually a top 10 or top 200 list, or is it just 200 in general? I guess they didn't say top 200 hip hop albums of all time, but they did say it's of all time. So just by saying that alone, it's okay, well, these are all supposed to be really good albums. So I don't know. Again, we'll get into that rant in a second. Then we have My Beautiful Dark Twisted Fantasy at number 6, which I would also honestly argue maybe not top 10, but I would place it a little bit lower. I know all the Kanye fans love it, and I get it, but for me, not so much. And then thinking about it too, maybe they're also thinking about it's hard to not put yourself in that, right? You have this album that came out in 2010. This is completely different from what Kanye had done in the past. It's obviously a departure from Graduation and everything prior, and then it's a different departure from 808s and Heartbreak too. So yeah, it's different, and it was insane at that time, but is that enough to put it that high? And then we have Missy Elliott, Miss E, So Addictive. Cool. It's interesting. I do like that they're showing her some love because people tend to ignore her, unfortunately, or forget about her. But then Wu-Tang Clan's 36 Chambers at number 8. That doesn't make sense to me. I feel like that should be, in terms of impact and cultural relevance, what is Wu-Tang? And then just below that, you have A Tribe Called Quest, Low End Theory. Both certifiable classics. I don't know anyone who would argue that it's not. And then number 10, Lauryn Hill, The Miseducation of Miss Lauryn Hill, or Miseducation of Lauryn Hill, which I appreciate that they included that. I honestly would place that a little bit higher. I don't know where exactly, but still, so those are your top 10 there. Most of them could be moved around, and most of them, honestly, might get pushed away. They're good albums, yes, but are they good enough to be in the top 10? Nah. It for me, it depends on the day for a lot of them. But that goes into what exactly was the criteria? Was it cultural relevance? Was it impact? Was it sales? Because it's hard to say with just these albums. The only thing that, I don't know what they all have in common to put them this high up. Yeah, they're good albums, but top 10? I don't know. Honestly, I just wish we had more information as far as the rankings, because I kind of said, it honestly sounds like they just threw a bunch of albums into a number generator and assigned random numbers to it. They're okay, yeah, we'll we'll put Cardi B at number 16. That makes sense. And then we'll put Nas at 24. Yeah, yeah. And then Lupe, no, we're not even going to include Lupe. That's insane. Mos Def? No. He's already on there. We got the Black Star album. Why would he need to be on there more times? It's not like his other solo albums are also classics. Like, what? Like, it's so strange to me. Like, yes, this is of all time. So there's a lot of music in all time. Like, hip hop is young, yes, but there's also a lot of music. There's so much music that no one pays attention to that you could be like, oh no, like if you can argue it, like this is gonna be great. It's gonna be like number one. Like I'm sure you could do that, but that's not what we got. We got albums that everyone knows. It's a very safe collection of albums, I guess. But then it's again just the placement. Like if they meant for this to be in a top 200 sort of list, what other criteria did you have? Like how I want to see the argument for Take Care being at number 11. Like why is Take Care at number 11? Because honestly, all we really got were like from each author regarding the album was a little blurb, which I mean I probably could have checked and seen if it was just from a review, but each author just has a little, or each author who wrote about the album has a little blurb about it, and they don't necessarily say anything about its placement. They just say what they like about the album and like why it's important, which you know it makes me feel like it really wasn't meant to be a ranked list. Like these are just good albums, but I don't know. I mean, there's so many issues. Like I mentioned, like not including Lupe or any Mos Def solo albums is insane. Like what? Like, that doesn't make any sense to me. Having All Eyes on Me at 29, having Iron Man at 69, nice. Like it's just so bizarre to me. Like it just seems like everything's arbitrary, and maybe their plan was just to throw all these albums out here and get people to talk about it and get people to look at and talk about the article. And if that was the goal, mission accomplished. But yeah, it's insane. I'll link the article in the description below so you can also just kind of yell into the abyss about it. But yeah, it's crazy. Like how do you have the Carter 2 below the Carter 3? Like, yeah, sure, the Carter 3 may be more popular or whatever, but like, really? Really? And then you have, like, you're going to say that Vince Staples' Summertime '06 is better than the Slim Shady LP? Like, I love the Summertime '06, but arguably, like, the Slim Shady LP is better. Like, it doesn't make sense. But I guess they... Like if you set too many boundaries, it gets way too complicated. But then you end up with a list like this. So I don't know what to say. I don't know what's better. Should they have done like just by era? Should they have done in like just subgenres? Like would that have made more sense? I don't know. But that's kind of my rant. Let me know in the comments below what the most infuriating position of an album you found is, because honestly, I just kind of skimmed through a lot of it and just got mad. But let me know what you find. Also, like and subscribe if you want to see more ramblings like this. Thank you for watching, and please stay safe out there.